So welcome all to the special edition webinar on how to banish organizational churn. This is a special edition webinar for CEOs. Typically, I make it available for all managers, but I did have a lot of requests about the perspective of organizational churn from the CEO, and I thought it would be really worthwhile to do this for you. So thank you for logging in. I do appreciate it. I know how absolutely critical your time is. I much prefer a format where we can be sitting around a table and have a much more interactive format, but unfortunately this technology just doesn't allow for that. It does allow for me being able to chat with a lot of you, and you to be able to be sitting at your desk to go through this content. So that's the advantage. So in any event, we will now proceed and go ahead for the webinar and start with the question, what do effective CEOs get right? So the key point that I would like to raise in this one is, and I'm sure this is, that you get this and it's even intuitive to you, but if we think about an organization, the organization exists within an environment, and the purpose of that organization is to create value. So you're receiving input from the environment, and you're processing it in some way, whether you're a service organization or a production organization, and then you're producing output. So the purpose of the organization then is to create value. You are taking that input and creating value in a way that your competitors or alternatives are not able to do. So that's a system. The important point here is from the perspective of your stakeholders, your customers, your service recipients. The organization is a black box. They don't care much about what happens with inside that black box. What they care about is, what is the input? What does it mean to me in terms of the services that I'm receiving or the products that I'm buying? And so that black box becomes critically important, though, to the CEO, because as the head of the organization, you're the individual that is concerned with that value. Sort of, how do we do our best job in terms of creating value? The only other slide I have on this one is this one, and I'd like to take about a bit of a systems approach for a second. So if we think about that black box and how do we create value, there's three major systems that you have that you work within. The first one is the overall organizational strategy. So what is our mission, our vision, our values? How do we position ourselves against our competitors and alternatives? What are the strategic and operational goals that we have? And then how do we finance and resource this organization? So that's one major tool / system that you have. The other one that we think about is that part about the systems that drive your organization to achieve your strategy. So how many layers should you have in the organization? How many functions should you have? What are the business systems that you have, the business processes that you have, and so on? So again, this is a very high level, but it's kind of the strategy on the one side and the organizational systems on the other side. The third major category is people. So how do you use people in your organization to achieve that strategy through the use of those organizational systems? So they're working across that, and it's the work of the people, your human resources in totality, that create the input. And I say all this so that I can make this point here, that the holding together of all of these systems, sort of how we work across these, really is the CEO. The CEO only is at the intersection of the organizational strategy and systems and the people, and can pull all of that together so that you have the right people in the right positions doing the right things at the right time. So having said all that, then the key point I wanted to start in terms of organizational churn is with this fact, which has been quite well proven in research in a number of different areas, and that is that 70% of strategies fail to achieve desired results. That's just an amazing number when you think of it. in my experience, most organizations have a strategic plan, so they're pretty good at achieving strategy. So it's pretty good at putting strategy in place, so developing that strategy and getting it approved. So the question then becomes, well, why? Why is it so difficult to actually execute against that strategy? I found this article in Forbes from Dr. Cotter, who's a well-known change agent, and he in his research indicates that only 5% of organizations implement their strategies successfully. So we have 25% that are Midland, and then that remaining 70 that aren't able to achieve it. So what I'd like to talk about today is organizational churn, what I mean by that term, and what the impact is on organizations in terms of you as the CEO being able to achieve your strategy as effectively and efficiently as possible, and within the timeframes that you've committed to your board for the actual provision of them. So the first question you'll have, and it's the right question, and that is, what is churn? So churn is that wasted energy in organizations that absorbs time. It wastes energy. It doesn't produce the expected results, those things that you would achieve. And it's characterized by these bullets that I have here: meetings, meetings, meetings. Why doesn't somebody just make a decision already? Conflict in the workplace. So I'm negotiating with somebody in this part of the organization to try to resolve issues in another part of the organization. It's poor communication. It's siloing within the organization. So it's all of these things that detract managers from the work that they need to be doing for success. And the result, the collaborative result of all of this churn in the workplace, is that we have a vision for the organization, which often looks like this on the slide that you see in front of you, where we can envision that which we want this organization to be over a certain period of time, and in fact the result ends up being much more like this little critter that we see here. So it's not for a failure of the CEO wanting to achieve that strategy. It's not for a lack of good intent of managers throughout the organizations and your frontline employees wanting to achieve that strategy. It's because they get so distracted and so tied up in so much of this, what I call organizational churn, that they're not able to successfully focus in on those things which are important, so that they're all pulling in the same direction and helping the organization to achieve its strategy. So organizations do tend to attack these issues, and they do things like what you see on the screen here. So they put in place training programs for better meetings, better exercises, leadership training, and so on. And these are good things. So don't take what I'm saying in the wrong way. It's not that these aren't important things to do, but the programs in and of themselves seldom seem to deliver the desired results. And there is a reason for that. So what I'd like to do is take you on a bit of a sidebar here and walk through why that is in organizations, and why training doesn't have the expected results. This is a survey that I found that was published by Gallup in 2013. They do it every 2 years, so I should be hopefully able to find a new one soon. And here they look at employee engagement surveys in the American workforce. They do have a larger survey which looks at it in the Canadian workplace and other countries in the world as well, but nothing that shows it year by year like this. And what startled me about this one is that if you look at the engaged versus not engaged versus actively disengaged over a period of the last 15 years, so from the year 2000 to the year 2012, the percentages don't change. Now, by Gallup, they talk about engaged people as those people that are always going the extra mile, the engaged people that are doing their job, but not much more, and the disengaged people who could actually be working at counter purposes to the organization. So this is important stuff, and it's important also to the extent that when you look at the components of engagement, organizations that have higher engaged employees are more successful. They have a higher return on earnings. They have higher profit margins. So these are important things. So if they are important, then I ask the question, why does the trend line stay as flat as it appears to me to be. Now, I don't have the original data, so I can't do the actual analysis for you, but if you eyeball these numbers, you look at engaged employees moving from 26 to 30, 30, 28, 29, 26, 30 to 30 in the last year that we have the measurements for. So if we're measuring things that are important to organizations and organizations are trying to do something about it, then you would expect that over time that we would be able to achieve some differences. Now, there's undoubtedly a lot at play here, and I'm not going to get into it, but what I want to into it in as much detail as we could. But I want to give you two examples that will illustrate to you what I think is happening in organizations. So the first one is think about communication. I picked this as an example because in every employee engagement survey that I have ever seen, communication, or poor communication more precisely, comes up at the top or very near to the top. So imagine or travel with me virtually, if you will, to a water cooler in the organization. I'd like to describe a couple of conversations that I have heard, and I'm sure you have heard as well. So one communication might be like this. It's what a manager talking to a peer manager and saying, you know, I was delegated this project by my boss. I've been working on it hard for 2 weeks. The deadline is for next week, so I was making really good progress on it. And I just found out today that the executive management team made a decision which is going to delay that project for a whole year. Boy, I just wasted that entire amount of time. Do we ever have poor communication in this organization? Think of the conversation in another water cooler where you have an employee, a manager that's talking to another manager and says, you know, I just found out today that we're implementing this new process and it's taking place next week, and that's going to have a huge impact on my subordinates, and I didn't find out about it until today. Boy, do we have poor communication in this organization. So I give you these two examples to give you the language that people use in terms of communication. So they're not getting the information that they need in the time frame that they need to really impact appropriately on the work that they're doing. And where in the organization does that communication need to come from? Now, certainly you need town hall meetings so the CEO gets the vision out there. You need newsletters, you need whatever forms of dissemination. But at the end of the day, the kinds of things I'm talking about here need to be delegated by the manager in a time frame that's appropriate, and information that is right-sized and appropriate for that subordinate manager to be able to deal with in an appropriate way. So the language they have is to use communication to describe that they're not getting the right information in the right time frame. And to me, that's a failure of managers to do their work from the CEO on down. So if the CEO knew that the project was, the CEO and the executive management team canceled or postponed this project in the first example, the VP needs to think about, well, what are the implications, and inform my directors. Then the directors need to think about the implications and inform their subordinates and so on down the organization. The second example I have for you is collaboration. I won't spend as much time on it, but in terms of this one, I use a picture of traffic, because I think of collaboration in organization as kind of like rules of the road. Imagine traffic in a city. This traffic, for example, if people didn't have standard rules, you know, drive on the right-hand side of the road, what a signal light means, what traffic lights are, how to yield, when to yield, and so on, it would be utter chaos, and traffic would, you know, just grind to a halt. It's the same in organizations. You need the rules of the road in organizations for people to understand how work flows across the organization, so that in terms of understanding what I can get from others in terms of myself being able to do my job effectively is the same understanding as the person that has to support me in doing that work. And similarly, the language here for people at the water cooler is you know, somebody in operations is saying that I needed to do this analysis for my boss, and I needed a report from finance. Finance said they would have it for me yesterday. It didn't show up. I phoned them and they said, well, they got busy with something else, then they can't get it for me until next week. Boy, do we have poor collaboration here. But it comes down to the same kind of thing as in the first example, is the director in finance that has this accountability doesn't have the same understanding of their accountability with respect to their peer in operations operations about how they will provide this information, how much of a priority it should be, and so on. And the only person that can really set that for them is their manager, so that you're getting a similar understanding. So I say all that to really define churn. That to me, churn is really that initiatives are failing to deliver because in so many cases, we're really looking at the symptomatic aspect of things that are going wrong in organizations. So we're thinking about communication as being the issue and trying to treat communication. We're thinking about collaboration as the issue and trying to do team building exercises. When in fact, by doing that, it's like giving a fever for an aspirin. The fever is going to go away for a while, but because you haven't treated the underlying disease, the fever is going to come back. So it's the same thing in organizations. The underlying issues that we're dealing with here are really the accountability and authority framework with respect to managerial leadership in the organization. So how work is delegated down the organization, how work flows across the organization, so that people are working on the same scorecard, playing to the same rules, if you will, and are able to collaborate in a way that that is important. So it's really important to get to these root cause issues. So in my time as a management consultant and as a manager and leader and head of organizations, I've talked to thousands of organizations. And in that time, there's a very consistent feeling of managers that they feel they're delegated too much work. They feel that they're under-resourced in order to be able to do the work that's required of them. And they feel that generally that their priorities are not clear. So I really wanted to get to the root of that. In 2012, 2013, I actually collaborated with the University of Ottawa to do a research project to get to the heart of what that measurement was. And in doing my reading, I found that this had actually never been quantified before in the managerial sciences literature. And surprisingly, although people talk about this all the time, there hadn't been any formal research into it. And you see the results on the screen is that managers only spend 55% of their time doing value-added work. So that's work that only they, in their position, with their capability, are able to do. There's three aspects to this value-added work, which I'd like to just talk about for a second with you. So it's if managers aren't able to focus on their value-added work, what does that mean? So I would say there's three aspects to value-added work that are really important to bear in mind. So that's work that only that person in that position can do. So the first one is there's their day-to-day work. I call that their position description work. What does my position description say that I need to do? And the continuous improvement around that. So that's the ongoing work in the position that needs to take place. The second one has to do with projects or change initiatives. So those tend to be related more to strategy. They could be special projects for implementing some change, but usually if it is a special project, it's related to some kind of a strategic initiative. So those tend to be more bound. They're delegated. People have specific resources delegated for that, and they have a time frame for delivering the results. And then the third one, which often doesn't make this list, the third one is managerial leadership. So the only person that can provide managerial leadership to the subordinates of a team is the manager of that team. Now, certainly HR can support it. You can give training, you can give coaching, you can do mentoring, but at the end of the day, it's the manager that does that work. And the manager doing that work is really, really important. There's just two quick pieces of research that I'd like to show you now. The first one is that 70% of employees leave a job for reasons related that are directly controllable by their manager. So 70% of managers, of employees leave positions for reasons directly controllable by their managers. So the manager could have done something that they did not do to retain that employee. The second one is also quite startling from Gallup. I love the Gallup research. They're really mining their database. But here we see that work groups that are ineffectively managed are 50% less productive and 44% less profitable. There's other research that was done that reinforces the role of the manager, and I'd like to just point this one out quickly, and then we'll be starting to get to the heart of the webinar. This was published by James Heskett back in 1972. 1992, just a little over 20 years ago. And he wrote this he was a professor at Harvard University and published this in Harvard Business Review. And the first one to actually describe what's called the service profit chain. So employee satisfaction. So if you have more satisfied employees, will result in more satisfied customers, which will result in increased revenue and profit. That's been redone in research multitudes of times. So there's just a lot of good research supporting this. So employee satisfaction drives customer satisfaction, drives revenue and profit. What's not often mentioned and forgotten is that in Heskett's original paper, there's a fourth box at the beginning of this, and he states quite clearly that it's managerial leadership systems that underpin this entire service profit chain. So employees don't become satisfied by themselves. Employees become satisfied because managers are setting an environment and providing the direction and delegating the accountability and authority and so on to ensure that they can be successful in their work and therefore satisfied with their work. So in our findings then, the bottom line of the findings for the research that we did with the University of Ottawa is that in those organizations with higher accountability also experienced higher effectiveness of their managers. So there was a very direct and very high 0.74 statistically extremely significant correlation between accountability in organizations and effectiveness in organizations. So that was the fundamental finding. I won't be able to get into a lot of detail on this one simply because we don't have the time. If this was a half-day workshop, I'd love to explore this with you in more detail. But what I have done is this great new feature in GoToWebinar is that on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see a dropout called handouts, and there are 3 handouts in there, and one of them is this white paper on Are Your Managers Effective? So it describes the research and gives you some high-level oversights about what you might do in your organization to actually improve it. So coming back then to accountability in the organization. So I was also surprised in the research that we did that there's no standard definition for accountability. So we really do need to bear in mind that we need to think about what is accountability in an organization. If it's that directly related to effectiveness, it's absolutely important, and we need to focus in on it. So accountability is an obligation for which one can be held to account for one's results and one's actions by a specified other. So 3 very specific and important components to us. So it's this obligation. So the individual feels an obligation. The second is that it's not only the results, but it's how you got the results. So it's the results and the actions. And the third is this concept of specified other. So there needs to be an other individual who is holding me to account, because without that other individual, there's no one who can call for that accountability. So we're really describing the situation of a manager subordinate in an organization. So if I'm the manager, I delegate to you, and then I can call you to account. Did you do it? Are you on time? Did you use the appropriate amount of resources? Is the level of quality appropriate? Is the quantity appropriate? All of those things. So that's part of the calling to account. So here was the really big aha for me in terms of accountability, because in my own sense was that people did tend to carry accountability in organizations. Any managers that I was accountable for managing in my lifetime carried accountability and did good work generally. I mean, sometimes you have performance issues, but then you deal with those. So the aha here is that there are actually 2 different dimensions to accountability. So the first dimension is felt accountability. How strongly do I feel accountable for doing stuff, whatever that stuff is? So how strongly do I feel accountable? So that's really important, and it scored very high. It was almost, if it was a term paper, it was almost A plus. So it was 8.7 out of 9 on the benchmark. Some organizations scoring over 9, some but all in at least the mid-8s. So that fits with my pictures of individuals and organizations. Individuals want to do well. If they're employed by the organization, not only do they want to do well, they want the organization to do well, and they feel some inner held belief that they are accountable for doing that. The second dimension, which is equally important, is clarity of accountability. So how clearly do I understand that which I can be called to account for? So how clearly am I accountable for the work that has been delegated to me? And on that one, the score is much lower. Some organizations scored in the 6s, some in the 7s, and the overall result was 7.1. So here we're seeing a great disparity between felt accountability, how strongly I feel for doing stuff, and that clarity of accountability, how clear am I about those things for which I am being held to account. And this is really, really important because this clarity of accountability relates not only to clarity of action, so those things that are delegated to me down the organization, but also clarity of interaction, because if from the CEO through the VPs, through the directors, through the frontline managers down to the workers, if there's clarity about accountability and authority, both about how work goes down the organization and how work flows across the organization, not only will I be clear about my role, I'll be clear about my role with respect to how I relate to others in the organization. So this accountability and authority framework in organizations becomes really important. And the question then becomes in your organization, as I've laid out on this slide. So whether or not clear accountabilities are set, managers are going to take on or feel accountability. So they're going to feel accountability for doing good work. The question then isn't whether managers will feel accountable. We know that they will. The question is whether they will feel accountable for doing the right things. And this then links all the way back to where we started in terms of the strategy of the organization and how do managers collaborate with each other and ensure that they're focusing in on the right work. Well, it's because their managers in turn are delegating clear accountability to them. So that brings us, so that walks us through the section of the webinar where I wanted to talk about clarity of accountability and the importance of an accountability and authority framework in the organization, because we're really thinking about how do I, as the CEO, ensure that every manager is absolutely clear about what they're accountable for, not only in terms of their work, but in terms of the relationships that they have with others in other parts of the organization. And if I can have that clarity, then we're going to be much more successful at executing our strategy so that we can end up with the unicorn instead of the donkey that we saw in the previous version. In the slide that we had on strategy. So that brings me then to the effective point of accountability. The effective point of accountability, just 10 days ago, we received information from the Trademarks Office that we have the registered trademark for that. So we're really excited about it. It is a new way of thinking about accountability and authority in organizations in a way that can be intuitive to organizations, but it creates this language in an organization so that you as the CEO have this language that is used in a consistent way so people do understand about work and how it flows down the organization. So the first point, the first aspect, I should say, of the effective point of accountability is that for work that flows down the organization, it combines the concept of single point of accountability with the concept of the lowest point of accountability. So from a single point of accountability perspective, it's critically important that that there be one individual that is held accountable for output for any particular delegation. The example I give to demonstrate why that's important is think of the office kitchen on any floor in any office. In those where I see a sign that says, please clean up after yourself, there's almost invariably a sink full of dirty dishes. So if everyone's accountable, in my experience, no one is accountable. And if in things as important as strategy execution, if something is important in the organization, you as the CEO want to know from your perspective who is that single point of accountability. So for human resources, from your perspective, it's the CHRO. So the vice president usually of human resources is accountable for the human resources systems. The chief financial officer is accountable for the financial systems. And for you, that is the single point of accountability. So you don't want to muddy finance doing HR stuff, for example. So at your level, that's relatively clear. But when it moves down to the next level, the VP also needs to have in their mind, so if I'm the VP of finance, what are those single points of accountability for that work that I'm chunking up and sending down? So payables, receivables, treasury, whatever they might be, that I also have single points of accountability. And then as that moves down to the manager level, how does that work? So that we're absolutely crystal clear in that. One of the biggest failings that we have in organizations is in project work where you create a project manager to implement results from a project and they're not given the appropriate authority to do the work. So as a result, kind of all the VPs are held accountable for doing the work and the project manager is left to try to negotiate how to get that work done. Just before I leave this slide, the second concept is the lowest point of accountability. So for all of that work, for work that is being delegated down the organization, you want that single point of accountability to go as low down the organization as possible so that as close to the action as possible, the person has the accountability and the authority to make decisions, to take initiatives, to do the good work that is necessary at that level of the organization, but not too low that the person doesn't have the problem-solving capability to successfully do the work. So at each level then, the individual starting with the CEO needs to decide what is the value-added work. So in terms of strategy execution as the CEO, what are those things that I need to do personally? What is my value-added work? What are those things that I can chunk up and delegate down to the next level of the organization for the VPs to be the single point of accountability? They then in turn decide what it is in conversation with you, of course, decide what it is that they need to do that you will hold them accountable for, which is their value-added work, and which of those they can chunk up and delegate parts of it down the organization a little bit further, and then similarly at the next level down. So that becomes part of the context and boundaries in the organization in terms of how work is delegated down the organization, what I expect you to do in your job, and what I will be holding you specifically accountable for in the work that you need to do in your organization. So without this kind of a framework, we end up with a situation like you see on this next slide, where organizations can tend to drift, because in my experience, what tends to happen in organizations is that the executive management team puts all of its effort into the development of the strategic plan. There's a lot of conversation, there's the environmental scans, there's a lot of really good work goes into that. The board approves the strategy and the CEO and the VPs kind of have the celebration party and say, okay, get on with it, let's implement it. And the VPs go along and do their own thing. And that's good as far as it goes. But the issue is, unless the CEO is having those specific conversations with each VP about what are you accountable for, what are those things that, what is your value-added work that you will specifically be doing, what will you be delegating down in very precise, clear terms to your directors and so on, what happens is you'll see, kind of like in the Chinese whispering game, even with best intentions, people have filters. So operations is going to have the operations spin on that particular objective. Finance will have the finance spin. HR will have the HR spin. Marketing will have the marketing spin. And there will start to be a bit of a drift as it moves further down the organization. So that over time, the entire organization tends to be diffusing its efforts instead of creating a synergy with its efforts. So what you need to do is create something that looks more like this, whereby being absolutely clear in terms of delegation of accountability and authority, and clear in terms of managerial leadership accountabilities and authority, so that VPs do the same things that the CEO does with respect to delegating work clearly, that the VPs ensure that the directors do and so on. You can get all of the output aligned so that it's pulling the whole organization in the same direction, and that becomes a really important part of the work. So I'd like to now then move on to cross-functional work because it gets just a touch more complex in cross-functional work. And that's because you have so many more moving parts. When you're talking about work flowing down the organization, you have single points of accountability and you try to get that as low as possible in the organization as possible. In our research, it showed that there's very high interdependence in organizations, and if you think about it, it just makes sense. If I'm going to be successful in my job to do what I need to do, I will depend on others to support me, because as organizations grow, you just get more specialization, and that specialization therefore means that I rely on others to be successful in my work. So I've driven a model organization. I've drawn a model organization here, which most organizations aren't that neat. So this work though is really all about then how do we set context and boundaries so that people have the same understanding of their accountabilities with respect to others as those others have of them. Because the churn in organizations that I see is not, again, because of ill intent. It's because people have different understandings about how they relate to each other with respect to the work that they need to do. And because they're accountable to their manager, if I have a different perception from my VP than my peer in another part of the organization does from his or her VP, then we're going to be working within that context. And therefore, the twain shall not meet because we have a different understanding about how we should be relating to each other in the organization. So the starting point is to think about processes. So if I have a process over here in Team B, so it's Team Green on the left-hand side of your screen. So Team Green has a process, everybody's involved in that process, they do their work together, and we'll see that if there's a problem with that process, if there's a need for the change to that process, if there's conflict and misunderstandings about how we work together in that process, then the manager of that team can make that decision. So as the manager of that team, I can decide what the result should be, and I can direct people to work differently. I can direct the process to be improved or changed or created if there wasn't one. So that's the simplest part of cross-functional work, because it's within one managerial team, and the effective point of accountability then is the manager of Team Green. If we think then of a process that goes across two different organizational units, so this one goes across Team Green and Team Gold. So if there's a misunderstanding in terms of a handover, a process, or how work will be done between Team Green and Team Gold, then we see that no longer do you have one manager that's the manager of these people that can decide and direct the team. Team Gold, the manager for Team Gold can direct Team Gold to do things differently, and the manager for Team Green can direct Team Green to do things differently. So if there's a misunderstanding or a disagreement, the two of them can talk, agree how to do things differently, and change the context and direct their own team. So that would be the ideal situation. They work it out. If they can't work it out because they have a different understanding of how they will work with each other, then it has to escalate up one more level to the single point of accountability, which would be the effective point of accountability for process B, which is one level higher. If you have a process that goes across the entire organization, as you see for process C here, then the effective point of accountability, that single individual who has the authority to decide and direct with respect to changing that is in fact the CEO. Now, that's not to say that the CEO has to personally manage every process that goes across the entire organization. In fact, the CEO will appoint process managers. So if it's the budget process, for example, the CEO would delegate to the CFO the accountability for the budget process, and the CFO would delegate different parts of it, so data coordination to one of the directors and analysis to another one of the directors, and so on. So that's all cross-functional work, and the effective point of accountability would move down the organization depending on what happens. But at the end of the day, if the process isn't working, if the VP of operations isn't meeting the time frame for the budget process for you as the CEO to get your consolidated budget within the time frame that you want, the CFO cannot direct the VP of operations to do that work. Now, usually the VP of operations will do that work because they know that the budget is important to the CEO. So that's a simplistic example. But if for valid reasons they have a different understanding, then the CEO is the only one that is able to actually make the decision, decide, and then direct. So the bottom line then in all of these areas is that for cross-functional work, the effective point of accountability is at the CEO level. So the final example I wanted to give you in this one was process D. Here, if you have even only two individuals that are involved in a process, but they're in different parts of the organization, where is the effective point of accountability that can decide and direct? Yes, that's right. It is the Chief Executive Officer. So again, the CEO does not need to necessarily do all of the work in developing these processes, but if there is churn in the organization, at the end of the day, it's only the CEO that has the authority to make that go away. I implemented this, just to give you a quick example, I implemented this process with a client just a couple of months ago, actually. And they were having ongoing problems with this major process that they have in the organization. From the perspective of the CEO, things were working okay. You know, you could sense some of the churn, but it seemed to be working okay. But HR was telling the CEO that there were real issues. So I came in and I interviewed all of the vice presidents, and I did find out that there were actually really significant differences. So from the perspective, this is a large infrastructure organization. So from the perspective of the head of infrastructure and the perspective of the CFO, there were completely different understandings about their authority with respect to each other. So for instance, could the CFO stop spending if a project budget was looking like it was going to go over, or were there some contingency on infrastructure, or could infrastructure sort of manage against other projects and overspend on one to underspend in others if it's better for the whole organization? So at the VP level, they tended to be able to work that out, but because there were these different misunderstandings, by the time you got down to the director and the manager level, you had real problems going on in terms of projects not being completed according to spec, because finance would be putting the brakes on spending while operations wouldn't have it, and because they didn't understand what a issues resolution process might be to come up the organization, kind of made trade-offs that were absolutely suboptimal to the organization. So we had an absolutely fabulous discussion about this at the executive management team level, and the CEO made the call and made it absolutely crystal clear in terms of finance and infrastructure how these two departments would work together, and what the limits on authority would be for one and as opposed to the other. And both weren't happy with the result because it didn't fit the model that they had thought they would be working under. But on the other hand, both stated quite clearly at the meeting that they were happy the decision was made. They could then delegate down their organization and absolutely get rid of this churn within their organization. So I'm going to skip that next slide because I've given the example. I was going to walk you through an example there, and I just walked you through an example. So we then do come to the aspect of this final summary slide, where in the organization for cross-functional work, the effective point of accountability rests with that position that can decide and direct. Similarly, with the last document that I distributed, talked about having available for you, we do have a white paper on the effective point of accountability, and that is also in your handouts tab, so you can click on that and download that paper for your reference. So we'd like to then move into part 3 of the webinar, and part 3 of the webinar is really looking at how do we work together in our organization, and how do we provide support to the CEO in terms of being able to make decisions that are necessary for implementing this effective point of accountability to ensure that accountability and authority is appropriately delegated down the organization. So the very first step is to understand the current state of an organization. In any organization, it's absolutely critically important if you're going to change a system to understand that system, because if you don't understand the system and what its current state is, when you implement change, you actually end up in a situation where you might have unintended consequences to that change. So if you think about most organizations, if you've got a major initiative underway, if you've got a new strategy coming in place, and you're contemplating the implementation of that strategy, if you think about your financing, you'd have good systems and processes in place to understand how you're going to fund that initiative. Your financial reporting in terms of tracking your initiative and how you're doing against projections, you'll have that in place and you'll have a good sense of it. If your infrastructure, if you have to build a new plant, what is your capability to do that or to expand your current facilities? If you inventory, your delivery systems, your supply chain. The point I'm making here is that organizations tend to have systems in place for doing all of this work, for understanding it, for measuring it, for being able to predict the scalability that you have and be able to implement things. The question, though, becomes, what is the state of your managerial workforce? And in my experience, most organizations don't think about that. They're thinking about all of these other things in terms of how are we going to implement this strategy, but it's relatively unknown in terms of how clearly are we delegating work. As the CEO, how confident can I be that when we make a decision, it's going to be delegated consistently and implemented and executed consistently right down to the bottom of the organization as quickly, effectively, and efficiently as possible. So the point I come to is that it becomes really important for a CEO to, excuse me, I'm getting excited about this. So it gets really important for a CEO to understand how they can have the most significant impact on managerial effectiveness. And while traditional employee surveys require all employees to participate, with the approach that we have developed through the manager effectiveness assessment, CEOs can get the results with an investment of 20 to 30 minutes of each manager's time. So by using this particular assessment, they can measure effectiveness, they can measure accountability, and 6 related measures. Now, I'm not going to get into these 6 related measures. I have a webinar that focuses completely in on the research and the findings if you're interested, but also that white paper that I referred to earlier is available, and it has all of the information on it. So the manager effective assessment has various degrees in terms of the work you'd like to do. At the most basic level, the assessment is available to organizations. It's a 94-question confidential survey that's web-based. It gathers information directly from managers. As I mentioned, it's 20 to 30 minutes, data secure, and so on. The key element of a survey of this nature is that it is objective, so managers are able to talk in a confidential way about those things that are of impact to them. So we take measurements in a quantifiable way. So on a 10-point Likert scale, they can indicate how strongly they agree or disagree with something, and we can measure that, compare it to benchmark, and give the feedback to you. But then on the qualitative side, we also ask open-ended questions about the impact of accountability and authority in their own organization and from their own perspective. And because we were asking a lot of these questions, it triggers thoughts in their mind, which gives us really good information. There are also options to combine this survey-based form with interviews, and very often the approach taken in organizations is that I would be brought in to interview the CEO and at least the vice presidents to get their sense of the organization and managerial effectiveness. Sometimes selected others in other parts of the organization as well, and then we combine that much more comprehensive qualitative information with with information that's that I gather from the survey, which is quantitative in nature. So all of that and the assessment is then pulled together in the manager effectiveness assessment report. We provide a comprehensive report which will provide information that will be helpful to CEOs to make decisions. But we take that one step further as well, because it's you know, a report is a report, it's paper. You know, how do you get the understanding of what that really means in the organization? So we build right into the base assessment a 3-hour meeting. If depending on where in the country you are, it might be a web-based meeting, but a meeting where I provide support to the organization in terms of you understanding the report. Typically, I would facilitate a meeting of the CEO and the CEO's executive management team, discuss the findings, make sure that you understand them, but then also facilitate a decision-making process so that you can decide what the key initiatives are that you should take in order to be effective in terms of the work that you need to do. So the report will quantify manager effectiveness in your organization. So you will know how effective your managers perceive they are in terms of value-added work, and that will be compared to benchmark. We're really excited. We're repeating the survey for the first time with an organization. So we'll have some longitudinal data in terms of how things have changed over 2 years. So in that case, we can give a comparison to benchmark, but also a comparison to previous findings. Based on that, you can build an action plan for improvement that's grounded in science-based findings. You can gauge the current state of your manager effectiveness, so you know where you're starting, and therefore what the strengths are in the workforce, what the opportunities are, and how you can leverage those strengths to really take the biggest advantage of the opportunities for improvement. The benchmarking, as I said, is important, although benchmarking is only one measure. So comparison to benchmark is one data set, if you will, but I always make it really make a really clear distinction in the report findings that the results as they apply to your organization are the most meaningful to your organization. So you may have some strategic initiatives where some aspects are more important to you than other organizations. So even though you might be at benchmark, you might say that's something I want to improve further. Need to assist in targeting manager effectiveness improvement programs by really getting to root cause, and that's where I started the discussion today, was around root cause versus symptoms. And finally, we provide a basis for major change initiatives and support strategy execution. So this comes back to the point that I made. If you're assessing your capabilities in all of these other areas, also assess your capabilities in terms of your managerial workforce and how capable they will be able to do the work. I recently published this book, The Effective CEO, The Balancing Act That Drives Sustainable Performance. I titled this because from the perspective of the CEO, it is a balancing act. So as the CEO, you're the only individual in the organization that has the first of all, the accountability for the overall organization, but also the distance, the context, the problem-solving capability, with, if you will, to understand what the implications of the various trade-offs are for decisions throughout the organization. So very often, finance will see that this is a particular route to go. Marketing will feel this way. Operations, production will feel this. They're usually not diametrically opposed, but they're all, of course, coming from their specialty to provide their input to you as the CEO in terms of their best input on the best activities going forward. So it's you as the CEO that kind of has to meld all of this together and really come up with the trade-offs and find that balance to what combination of those things all together are going to pull this organization in the direction that I want to take it. So anyway, I address the balancing act here. I talk about the 6 key functions of a CEO, and I also get into the effective point of accountability in this, and then also have a chapter on implementation in your organization. Just to let you know, we do have other resources on the Effective Managers website. So if you're interested in downloading any of those resources, they are available. Most are free. We do have a modest charge for some of them in terms of the just trying to recover some of our costs and keep the lights on. But I really do want to make knowledge as available as possible to individuals, so you find a lot of really useful stuff. Also, the blog, we have a couple of hundred articles there now on different aspects of management and executive approaches in organizations. Also, we have over 20 webinars on our YouTube channel. So this is an area where you can go to. This webinar will be on that YouTube channel, and we have other webinars there. What I find that many CEOs do is with their management teams, they'll actually take most of these webinars are actually 30 minutes. So they'll have the 30-minute webinar, receive these ideas in terms of how they're working together, and then have a discussion on it. So it might be a resource that you can use in your organization, and you're most welcome to use it in that way. In addition, as you'll see on the website, I offer a free 1-hour consultation. And this is a way of my being able to give something back, but also to give you some idea of the approach that I have. So if you're dealing with a specific problem, or if there's something that you would like to explore, I can be an objective person that has been around the block a few times, that can provide you some insights and may be able to help you in terms of arriving at a solution set. So do feel free to sign up for one of those if that would work. So so that brings me to the formal end of this webinar. If anyone has any questions, please do put them into the questions box now, and I would be very happy to answer that. I was just having one question here is coming up. I'll just read it as it comes in terms of cross-functional accountability and authority. Yeah, so the question is you know, in terms, just to summarize the question, it's in terms of people using their best efforts in different parts of the organization. And is it a cop-out to say that their manager isn't really giving them, delegating work appropriately? So perhaps I did overstate that portion of it. So from my perspective, absolutely, interdependence and collaboration is key to organization. Organizations are very, very interdependent, and peers and organizations should always use their best efforts to work things out. And in my experience, in fact, 80, maybe even 90% of the time, work does flow smoothly. So people do figure it out. People, if I'm in finance and I know this guy in operations needs this report tomorrow, and it's really important to operations, I'm going to do my best to provide that to them. So that's I think that is important, needs to be acknowledged, and should be reinforced. But that other 10 to 20% where it's not clear, because people have a fundamentally different understanding about how they will do work, is what causes the problem. So, for example, as the CEO, you decide that you need a new a report. The board has asked for a report on production, and it's reasonable from their perspective because, I don't know, you have a new initiative underway that's going to increase production significantly, and they want to see how you're doing, and they've asked for a monthly update. So you sit down with the director of finance, because there's financial analysis involved, and agree on the time frame and getting that report done. And then the CFO delegates to a director to pull all this together and gets the work done. So that sounds good as far as it goes, but what typically tends not to happen is the CEO having that same discussion with the head of operations, who has to provide the input data to finance for that analysis to take place. So often the first time that anybody hears about this in operations is a director or a manager in operations receives an email from somebody in finance which says, fill in this form and please provide it to me updated on a weekly basis so we can provide trending analysis. So from the perspective of finance, they've been delegated some important work, and the board feels this is important, so they want to get the best data possible. From the operations perspective, that director didn't know this work was coming, doesn't have the people to do it, didn't prepare his or her subordinates to be able to do it, so they get kind of blindsided and feel that this isn't, their real job, and finance is kind of asking them a favor. So the point I make in this is it's really important that when we're delegating work down the organization from the perspective of the CEO, you need to take into account that balance. How important is this report for finance and from finance to the board, and what is the impact on operations, and bringing in the operations people early on so that you can have those discussions and end up with the optimal balance between that report, which the board has asked for, and the impact on operations, which could be negative in one way or the other. So thank you for that question. I didn't want to overstate that, because really in organizations, most things work well. Most people play well together. And what we're talking about here is how can we get that churn in the organization reduced by the CEO and the executive management team having really good discussions about how do we work together and ensure that work is being delegated appropriately down both sides of the organization in the right way. So that brings us to the end of our time. It's exactly on the hour, so I do thank you very much for logging on. It's been a great pleasure speaking with you. I will forward you a link to the webinar. So a couple of you came in a bit after the start, so you can pick up some of the intro parts if you need those. So again, thank you. Do be in touch if you have any questions. I would love to hear from you. Thanks very much. Bye.
Hi, I'm Dwight Mahalitz, President of Effective Managers. Thank you so much for downloading the webinar. I hope that you enjoyed it and will find it useful. Feel free to check out other parts of the website for interesting downloads. Most are free, some are at a nominal charge, but I'm sure you'll find lots of interesting tools there and things that can help you be more effective. And in fact, that's what my job is. My job is to help you, help your organization be higher performing. The bottom line is that I want to start where you are, understand your problem, and provide services that can help you solve that problem and implement a solution as quickly and as effectively and as efficiently as possible. Give me a call, drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you, talk about your situation, and see if there's anything that we can do together. Thank you.